Hello, today on Breaking the Spell, our guest is Liyana Dhamirah, who is an author and has written this book called Homeless, about her incredible life story and experience as a homeless person some time ago. And in 2020, she was a candidate in the general elections for Red Dot United, one of Singapore's newest political parties. And in 2019, you also awarded the Woman of Resilience Award by WARE. And currently, you serve as a manager of programs for different nonprofits. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to having a wonderful conversation with you.
I'm looking forward to that too, and thank you for having me and for this invitation.
So we usually start with the same question for our guests, and this may actually be all covered in your book, but when was the first time in your life when you realized that things aren't the way they should be?
Yeah, you're right, actually. It's covered in the book, but I think I will just pull out an extract of that. And these happens to be like two instances, but it's in the same age range that was when it happened. So I was 22, I was pregnant, and I am in my 6th month. So I think it's the next trimester. And I remembered I was desperate, looking for shelter over my head, and I was homeless then. I think coming into 2-3 months already by then. So I've tried to find help from various other organizations to no avail, and I made it a point to visit the then MCYS, they call it, and what now is known as MSF, at their main office in Upper Thomson Hill. And it's a literal hill where you would need to climb up by foot if you were to go there by the public bus, right? So I was at the roadside, and I was 6 months pregnant, and I had 2 of my other displaced friends accompanying me. In their thinking, they're just concerned about my safety, not wanting me to faint halfway through, because they know it's going to be a hike in a way, right? So we walk up the hill, we went to the MCYS office, and that was like my last attempt for myself to find help. And I was hoping very desperately that I could get one at that point. However, after sharing my plight to the social worker over there, the response that I got from this Mr. Tan was that he understands my predicament, he understands what I'm going through. However, he also noted to me that I wasn't the only person or a family who is going through this situation. They have limited resources on their end. So he was offering me an alternative solution at that point, and he said that why not I consider the Backpackers Hotel at Geylang, which costs a certain X number of dollars a night. So I'm pregnant and I'm hormonal at that point. So I have a lot of emotions raging in me, and that was the first instance in me where I find that this shouldn't be it. I was told that in this country, if I were to find myself falling into a certain misery or situation, I can depend on someone for a certain help, not to the full length, but at least something. But there was nothing that was offered to me at that point. So that was the first instance. So thereon, there are other situations that happen. I had to go back to where I was seeking shelter at that point. My tent, we were pitching it at West Coast Park at a point. And I believe, though I was not clinically diagnosed, I believe that I went into depression at a point after the visit to MCYS office. And I slept in the tent for almost 2 weeks, not wanting to be in the outside world or not wanting to interact with anyone even after that. But I think in my journey, I met other good souls who helped me out, and this by happens to be strangers who come by the parks, helped me to write an appeal letter, and I got help thereafter through that route, even though weeks and months before that I tried to find it myself, but to no avail, right? But then, after receiving help, And I was placed, me and my family, we were placed in a shelter that housed two other families in a 3-room HDB flat. I find that it is uncomfortable, and I felt that it is much more, I can get a sense of privacy almost more in a tent by the beach rather than, sleeping in that shelter. So I made it a decision one of the weekend after getting the help to go back to the pubs, because the other families wasn't given the same shelter as me or mine family. So when I went back to the pub, and this is random, like nobody knows, not even my social worker knows that I went back to the pub on that weekend. And it's interesting that very night there was a raid by the authorities when we are about to go to bed. So it was about, I think, midnight by that time. I was still there with the other families who were still homeless, who were still pitching a tent over there. I brought along my tent, planning to just stay over the weekends, then I can go back to the shelter. But it's an interesting fact for me to experience a raid happening that night. And the first thing that come across to my mind was that why are this authoritative figure, like the police and the social worker, not here to save or protect us, but instead chase all of these people, all of these needy people away? And that was the conclusive instance for me that there is something not right here and things need to change. Yeah, that's long story short.
Yeah. I actually remember those 2 episodes quite vividly from reading your book, and there's so much that we could go into, like in those 2 episodes. The general sense I get is that those are moments when you realize that we live in a society that doesn't really take care of its most vulnerable members.
Yeah, it's not as what is projected in I don't know, the media or in many posters perhaps, right? Like Comcare and all of that kind of posters. Because if you were to go across all of these advertisements in a way, where they say that, if you are in trouble, don't be afraid, call this number, something like that. But I did that, and instead of getting the help that I really desperately need at that point, I face other challenges instead. And it is unfair almost to that extent. Of course, life is unfair. However, if structures or organizations that has been set up who's supposed to help, but in fact lend in a helping hand to the authority to instead nap and just eradicate the problem away by just sweeping it under the rug, asking people to go away from the park, disperse, and not be seen as living there, then it's not right as what it was projected so far.
Yeah, I remember reading that you're supposed to go to the family service centers for help, but they're the ones who actually tell the police where you are so that they can locate you, right? So it's so tragic that the people that are supposed to help you are not really doing that.
Yeah, but I believe there are good people in the system, right? And they could have shared that piece of information out of good intentions, which is to find help. However, it depends on other arrangements, right? To see if the help can be extended or if this problem just need to go away.
So, I think for many of our viewers, they may not have the opportunity to actually hear from someone who has experienced homelessness before. So maybe you could share, I don't know, if there's a way to shorten the narrative, but how you actually got into that situation of being homeless.
Well, I think it's a build-up of many factors. One being a very strained family relationship. That's one, I would say. Secondly, having other people who have different set of beliefs, who think that you need to strive for your own needs and for your own, of course, for your own successes, but don't depend on others for any help. So how I got into homelessness is first losing a purchase resale flat with my then husband in my first marriage. Back then, I was young and I depended on the house agent to guide us into the purchase. And little do we know that he signed us up to something which is beyond our affordability and beyond what we can afford, and we can't render the payment to the mortgages and all of that, and we ended up losing that flat. So after that was when it started, where we need to find a place to stay, because by then I have 2 growing boys with me, about 6 and 4 years old back then, and we just need a roof over our heads until we find another way to really have a fix to the problem that we're facing in terms of our housing issues, right? So we jumped from one sofa to another, from my mom's house, and then my mom need to relocate to JB, and then to my mother-in-law's house. But because from the start of that marriage, and because I was young back then, that my mother-in-law sort of not approved me to be her potential daughter-in-law at that point. So the strained family relationship starts from there. And even after 3 years at that point, and having 2 grandchildren, having birth 2 grandchildren for her, she still don't find me fitting to be a part of her family nucleus, right? So there was this one day where I tried to make it work between myself and my then husband, tried to save the marriage, because it seems like my nature of being a hard worker at that point, trying to, find the income and support my family, becomes like a challenge for me to retain my marriage. So I decided to resign from my job at that point. And I was at the prospect of having a promotion at that period. But I let it go because I had to prioritize family. But then my mother-in-law doesn't see us that way, or didn't see me that way even. And we just managed to stay over at her house for, I think, 3 weeks or coming to a month. But then during the morning of Hari Raya Puasa was when she told us to go out of her house, and she just chased us out, threw our belongings outside without any reason at all, and just tell us to leave. Yeah, so that was when that morning of Hari Raya Puasa, and it's interesting because it's occasion where us Muslims will normally gather together and strengthen family relationship instead of cutting it. So unfortunately, I was on the other end, and that was when I found myself homeless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions?
I'm really surprised at how tragic this tale is, and there are many more people who experience something similar. How did we as a society not have the empathy and the sensitivity to tune into feelings of one another and to take care of one another as human beings first? Because for the police, not before the police officer, the person in MSF, when you came to the person telling him of your plight, he was framed, and his perception of the problem was from a economics, supply and demand perspective, which was, we have this number of housing, and this is the demand, and there is a lot of demand and very little supply. So go and find an alternative. That was the frame of mind of the person who was attending to you. It was also from the perspective of meeting your material and probably financial needs. He was just looking at it from that lens.
Angle. Yeah.
But there are many more angles that we have never cultivated sufficiently within this citizenry to look at issues, and one which is feelings matter. Feelings and emotions matter. And there could have been a far better alternative in just the role play between the MSF officer and you.
Yep.
And I would like you to shed light on what this better alternative could have been, because you can feel the feelings and the emotions of what it means to be desperate, hopeless, to have no other means, to be at your wit's end. So I would like us to think a bit more about the alternatives. And then that's not just the responsibility of the one MSF officer. Because when Unsu asked you the question, what led to that one dire situation, meaning that was a situation of last resort.
Yes.
How could we, as a society and as a community, have intervened at so many instances? We could have watched out for signs and take care of one another to be a more gracious society.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
so there's
that's
just so many things to unpack.
That's a very good point. I'm sorry to interject. That's a very good point that you brought up, because our society runs in a way where we are based very much on our merits and on the notion that it is us who deserve to be where we are at. And as much as we deserve our success, we also deserve our falls. And when you are at your fall and you deserve that, then you find your own solution out there. Where not many people might be in my position, and not many people want to share how they feel, because throughout their life they has been taught to repress and not share about how they actually feel. What are their actual emotions, instead to find other solutions and distract their emotions in a way where this can be productive for them instead of addressing what they feel at that moment. That's one. Secondly, after going through what I went through, and in hindsight right now, after years of looking back at that particular period, I find that it will benefit for any organizations at all, be it the police or the social worker, the ministries or the meet the people sessions, that structures, to adopt a more trauma-informed approach in all their services. What trauma-informed meant is that understand or really read up, learned about how one would behave if they face certain adversities in life. And it's not a fixed set for any single individual. It's different from one to another, and it's not something that is structured in a way where you can say that, oh, it doesn't seem disheveled or it doesn't seem messy in the outlook, that you are not really as homeless as what you say you are. So you are not really needing the help right now. So just by that outer appearance in itself, right? Instead of asking them very specific set of questions to understand where they are at, regardless of how they look and how they act or how they behave. Yeah.
So, this whole topic of being trauma-informed is actually of deep interest to Santosh and myself, so I want to go...
Even at where I'm working at.
Right,
yes.
Yeah. So I'd like to go a bit further into this. So what I'm hearing you say is that, because a lot of people don't know what it means to be trauma-informed. Is it an approach where you really look beneath the surface of a person and go deep into their history and how their history might be shaping their current behavior and response to situations?
I wouldn't say much into going to the history, but more into the situational aspect of things. So, for example, if you are facing a car that is running into you at a very high speed, what would you do? Like, there's something that we say a natural bodily response, which is to fight, flee, or freeze, right? I mean, there's those three things that ultimately can be the outcome. So understanding that based on situation, how a human will react, that is one way to getting more into the trauma-informed approach or aspect of things. When you say, Unsu, about the getting to the history and understanding of one's person's history that leads up to where they are today or how they react or respond to today, it's more so of psychological works and what a psychiatrist might work with their beneficiaries or their client, or a social worker would ask and checks off the checklist on what are the things that they will need to ask to gather this data, right? To kind of like structure a person, this person is here because of the data, right? However, they didn't go deeper into the root cause of how a human can just react in some certain situation. So that particular understanding is being trauma-informed.
Right, yeah. So, when I read your book, I actually found it quite challenging to get through in one sitting. I mean, all the things that you went through, it was really hard for me to take in, starting from when you were 12 years old.
I'm so sorry to put you into that state.
No, I mean, it was very powerful reading, but like starting from the age of 12 and your parents divorced, and it was just this narrative of you always trying to pick yourself up, and really you come across as a real go-getter. You were even, I think, A-star, PSLE student.
But that didn't matter.
Great performer at work, and then life just kept dealing you these blows. And so I'm curious now, with your current, let's say, awareness of being trauma-informed, how would you interpret how you responded to all those challenges at each stage?
That's a very good question. I would say that how I responded back then is based on the choices that was offered to me at that point, and usually it's very little to no choices at all at that situation basis. So when I got, like, for example, the high scores in my PSLE, it doesn't help with the fact that my parents are divorcing, right, at that point. And I have no guidance from more senior peers into looking at what are the next steps for me after my PSLE studies. So what's next, right, in my studies? There's no guidance. And as a 12-year-old back then, having the scores, looking at the situation where my parents is going through this, what is a matter of priority at that moment, which is just to get into a school, make sure I still continue with my studies, and be there for my younger siblings. So that's just based on practicality, I would say, on the choices that I made back then. That said, it doesn't mean that there are a lot of choices or avenues out there for me to explore at that moment where I am left to make a choice. Yeah. So the absence of that, of what are the other avenues, options, or even guidance from others, I would say was one that made me respond in a way that I did back then.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, this goes entirely against the grain of, like, the idea of meritocracy and providing people equal opportunities. Yeah, so by the whole basis and the reason why we set up a meritocracy is to provide equal opportunity, but it doesn't seem to be the case here. And what I realize is there is psycho and social or psycho-emotional needs that are very important to pick out, in addition to financial and material needs. Yeah. Now, having been through what you've been through, I think your antennas are much sharper in identifying and in noticing if someone is feeling down, or someone is in a state of trauma, frozenness, having gone through a frightening, terrorizing experience. Is there something that we can do to make our community a lot more cohesive so that we look out for one another through signs, and we address these issues and nip them in the bud before they manifest into a big issue that we find it very difficult to deal with later on? So I think there are a group of society that has lived a life of privilege that might not be able to empathize or even be sensitive to that. Whereas there is another group that has gone through a different experience that has got sharper antennas. And I think it takes an entire village to look out for one another. Definitely. The whole narrative of self-reliance, again, is called into question. Because we fail to understand that a lot of what has brought us to where we are today is a result of many more forces that are not of our own doing. And I think people don't realize that. People think that I am here because of my own sheer will and effort. Now, I think there's just so much to unpack there.
And that's another good point that you brought up, which is it got to do with one, person believing that they got there because of whatever that they did, right? That's one. And secondly, about how the people around them and the society tells them to validate their own belief, in thinking that, they get to where they are because of what they did. Things like, for example, if I can just extract from my own set of experience, right? When I was going through my challenges of being a young mother back then, the words or the sentences that comes out of almost 90% of people's mouth when I were to met is, you've already destroyed your own life by having a baby. You wasted your young life by taking on this responsibility of caring for a child instead of doing other options that there may be out there. The most undignified thing I find back then was when a lot of these people who come to me and say that society is garbage. And when you go through or you grow up in a life where you keep on hearing that, you kind of like succumb to that kind of sentences, and you tend to believe that, yes, because a lot of people are telling me this, so henceforth I am, right? So as for me, I have to break away from all of that, and it's hard work. Because one, through many years of going through such treatment from young. Two, because of the societal settings that I'm in, my community, the people in my community who keep on saying that. And three, because of the situations that I faced there and time again, the challenges that I faced at that point, I had to work on the invisible, which is my mind, to understand that, hey, I am not who they say I am, in order to break away from all the challenges that has been pressed on me. And secondly, also develop a different set of lens to see that, hey, it's not only me that induces such challenges or was induced with such challenges. There could be other factors at play here, and there could be other things involved. What is that? Yeah, so I developed a sense of curiosity and looking at matters outside of what people tell me and outside of what I hear. And that really takes, I think I was at the brink of like what you asked in the first question to me just now, was what is the moment, right, that made me think there's something not right here. After going through that moment was when I start questioning things, and that was where layer by layer I got to see that, oh, hey, I'm not society's garbage. That's one. And secondly, there are things like bureaucracy at play here. There are red tapes, there are structures in place. Why is that so? Why is it being done this way instead of another way? And then why are these checklists instead of understanding people of their feelings, of their needs, rather than looking at it like what you have mentioned, Santosh, financial aspects of it. Why does finances always become the top priority of everything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think for you to have done that shows how much self-awareness you had going through that.
But it's not easy, Unsu.
I can imagine. And so what I would want to know is, like, when you said, you had to do a lot of the work, if there was someone listening to this who was in a similar place where they felt they were garbage, or society doesn't think they have any value, what would be your suggestion? Like, what is involved in the work? How do you get started in rebuilding your own sense of worth?
I would say that I started by embracing that nothing is linear. Nothing is just a one-way street. I started with telling myself that there is other pathways and there are other options, there are alternatives. And nothing is black and white. There are grays as well. Like, in the color, there are many colors, right? So I think I started from there, like embracing the fact that I can't always depend my value system or belief based on what people tell me, but I gotta explore more, read more, and not be biased in any form of way into thinking that, oh, this matter is good, this is right and wrong, this is right or wrong, but more of how and why is this happening this way rather than, just thinking of the absolute.
Yeah. Following this path, you went even further, and in 2020 you actually entered politics and tried to effect change on a larger systemic scale. Could you tell us actually how that came about? I mean,
I think the motivation stems from the years of trying to break away from such structure in the first place. So I mentioned earlier on, the night when we got raided at the park was what made me question, right, hey, this is not the right thing to do. That's one. Secondly, as I progress in the years of trying to get something better for my family and myself, that was when, as I was going through that process of changing, I witnessed other families and other people who's going through what I had gone through, and still with no support. And to me, it has been years, like we are talking about from the duration of 2010 to 2019, for example, right? For the 9 years that I effect the change in me, I break away from, all of that set of things that constrained me back then, I witness still other families who are still shackled in their own thinking based on, I don't know, whatever that they have gone through in life and what they faces, right, the challenges or the people that they meet. And from there, I think it's that journey in itself that motivates me to see that, hey, if I were to really effect an effective change, I had to go through at the nip of, I had to nip it from the bud, like where is this set of rules and structure being created in the first place? And that is at the law and policy making level, right? And that was when I was not a person who is very involved in politics from there, 2010 to 2019, but what I've been very involved in are other causes and activism by other activists. So I kind of like read up, follow them, support the causes, like for example the mandatory death penalty, the abolishment of it, and so on and so forth. There's various causes, and through that I find that there's one thing that ties everything together, and that is the law, the policy, the structure that has been set, that date in place, that it's not flexible, it's not changeable. And I question why. Like, why can't we change? It's over the years already. We can't carry on following the same set of rules and laws or policies when it has been 100 years or over 50 years, for example. Things need to change because, hey, we got an internet now. It's not like we are living in the era of kampong that we can, wash our clothes by the seaside, right? We are using washing machine, nice. So we need to adapt and evolve in that way, which is one, to relook and review the current policies and law that we have, and then adapt it to the point where now, hey, is it still working for the society at large? When we are saying about the rental housing, for example, does it really benefit the needy, and do we really make it accessible for them to really access this particular scheme, for example? So that's one. And because of the process that I had to go through to break myself away, right, from all of these challenges, I find that not only the pattern is there, which is that one thing ties all of it together, but at the same time, the people who are being placed at a position to approve and say that, okay, this becomes a law, this becomes a penal code, this becomes something, it's not in tune on the ground. I rarely see them walking the ground and really talk to the common people. Heck, if it's not for election, I don't even see them at all. So I think that was a motivating factor for me to be in politics, one. And I know that I'm not like the usual candidate, right? I'm not a scholar, I'm not someone who have gone to university. But I believe that with my set of experiences and what I've gone through, that perspective and the understanding that I have of people, because we are dealing with people, we're not dealing with objects or numbers or dollar signs here only, we're dealing with people. And people create all of that, right? Like the dollar sign, the financials and all of that. So that's the main thing that we will need to take care of. And how do we take care of them? Is by introducing all of these laws and policies from where it is. And I think that motivates me.
Yeah, I'm so inspired by everything that you just said. I mean, to think that, someone in your situation could have really seen to the root of the issue and understood that we have to, look at the laws and make and affect change on that level. And I don't know if there are that many people who live in a comfortable middle class life that would actually think or have the daring to want to make change on that level.
That's a very good point that you bring up, especially on the point of families who are comfortably living right now. They might be in the middle income, they might be privileged, right? Why would they want to change the status quo? But I think that also spells back to what they really care about and what they really understand, which is whatever that is being introduced in the law and policy level, it affects their day-to-day life. Like what you study, that affects it. Like what your children are able to pick up knowledge, that affects based on the laws and the policies that has been introduced. What you get to drink, how clean is your water, that affects from all the laws and policies that has been introduced. So by nature, if things can be made very layman from the policy level to the understanding of us common people like myself, then that would mean that, and I hope really, that more comfortable families, individuals, and even privileged ones were to question, were to in fact gain some awareness that, actually these things does affect what I drink, what I eat, and what I study or what I gain knowledge from. Yeah, if they can create that sort of connection and awareness, then that would be helpful for everyone.
Actually, now that you're talking about the law, it actually reminds me of one of my biggest bugbears right now, which is that I feel legal language is so obscure and ununderstandable. Like even for myself, someone who's pretty educated, I find most of it, like I need a lawyer friend to help me decipher it. And if that's the case, like how democratic can that be? Like I would want the law to be understood by everyone, as many people as possible. So I don't know, I personally feel like we need a campaign for plain English in law, or something like that.
Yeah, in a way. And the funny thing is that I tried to go to law school to kind of like really understand and learn the languages or the terms. But yeah, you're right on that note, which is we need to make things simple and not complicated so that people can easily digest it and understand. And this is plainly democracy.
No, I think there's just so many things to unpack there. The first is the principle of majoritarianism, right? So in policy, you want to have a policy lever that affects majority of the people, that gives you the highest returns on investment. And so there is an alternative which calls for what we call centering the margins, where instead of designing a policy only for the majority, you center the policy on the needs of the margins first, in the hopes that by designing it for the margins, everyone else's needs are met.
And that is equality, right?
And that is equality. Yeah. So that's the first principle of majoritarianism that we need to probably challenge in the design of our laws or policies. The next thing is, in the policy life cycle, there is needs analysis. You do the needs, then you design the policy, then you execute or implement, and then finally you do the evaluation. It's an entire life cycle. So you needs analysis, design, implement, and then evaluate, right? And policies have different life cycles, but
Yeah.
I think what came up to me very strongly when you were sharing this is the approving authority of that policy or the law at any one phase, from the needs analysis to the design to implementation to evaluation, cannot be a person from middle class background with no lived experience of what it takes or what it is like to be a person on the receiving end or a beneficiary of the policy.
Right.
This calls into place an alternative where someone like you, who's got that lived experience, through an entirely different process of what we call community-based participatory research, you are there in every phase of that life cycle as a check and a balance. You're not going to let a middle-class person with no lived experience sign off a policy unless it's vetted through by you. That is a very important lever that we need to implement.
Yeah.
And then we need to bring in the entire community. It's not just you. Many other people who have lived with homelessness to be there at every stage. Giving up that power is going to be very, very difficult. And which is why only when you enter through politics that you can effect such changes within the civil service to adopt a more CBPR approach.
Yeah. Well, you unpacked my strategy there on why I even go into politics. So thank you. But I think what you have brought up there is very powerful in a way, because like what I mentioned, we are dealing with people. So people has their own power regardless of which phases of their life they are in, and whichever station or role or designation that they are playing wherever they are at working. So on that note, and given that, like what you mentioned, policy goes into their own cycle of the analyses and so on and so forth, then at every juncture, it is important to have diversity of opinions and perspective in order to really understand, is this rule that we are changing or implementing affecting anyone in a positive or negative manner? How is that so? Pros and cons. So like when we can enter into such a debate in a way, as we are trying to approve the policy, right, then that makes sense, instead of just leaving the power to just one person.
Yeah, actually, so let me try and make this very accessible for almost anyone to understand, and with using an example that happened to me recently. So I like to think of the people who make up a country or a political body as a body, right? There's actually a phrase in English language, the body politic, right? We're supposed to think of ourselves as a body. And in the human body, although we may think like the head or the heart or the lungs are very important, but every single part of our body is important,
Yes.
right? And you don't realize it until you cut like a small part of yourself.
Exactly.
Then you realize how important it is. So something that happened to me over Chinese New Year was my head, the policymaker, really wanted to get at some love letters in a tin.
Right.
And I was like, digging at the tin, and then I cut my finger, and it was so silly, right? But my head was just ignoring, the little, this was just a tool for the policymaker. But then ever since then, this has really reminded me like how important even the smallest part of your body is. So yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean that's very good that you bring up that story, Unsu, because yes, you're right to note that like the example that you've given, your body, your mind, and all of that is the same as at any policy making or decision making level, where there's not only the head that comes into play, there's the hands and the feet as well. And where are all of these people when usually right now in this current setting and moment of our country is normally just the head and the side of the hands, for example, and it's not involving the rest of the whole biology of that human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to the police officer who was conducting the raid, you were a problem, or the homeless people are a problem to be eradicated or to be fixed. Not realizing that by trying to eradicate or fix that one part of the body which is causing pain, you would cause many other problems downstream that you cannot and vision.
Exactly.
So it's important to see everything as a body, and I like the analogy.
Yes,
it's
I know.
amazing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you're right, and it's the same as our illness, how it manifests, right? Like before we get sick, there are symptoms, there are telltale signs before it leads to the end obvious you're sick, right? But before that, you will have like body ache, you will have like, I don't know, headaches and letharginess, you'll feel very tired, you'll feel you're not yourself, and then at the end of the day, after a day or two, you realize that, oh, actually I'm sick, I'm having a fever. So instead of us going down that road and then at the end of it, right, it's better for us to understand, and address that particular telltale signs as it happens, and that is in our initial conversation being trauma informed.
And so, Unsu, what were your telltale signs before you cut your finger?
Well, first of all, the lid was really hard to get out, so I should have just slowed down, just paused, right? Like the first thing is just stop, be aware of what I'm trying to do. I think then I would have realized, okay, maybe I need to get a screwdriver to do this. That would be better.
Yeah.
Maybe
Use
you
other
didn't
tools.
Maybe you didn't have 8 hours of sleep before you opened the lid as well.
Yes, I think sleep is very important, and I feel as a society we should actually prioritize sleep.
Yeah.
I think, I hear a lot of parents now having to, like, their kids sometimes have to get up 5 a.m. just to get the school bus. And I don't know, I just feel we need to really look at this.
Yeah,
like
that's another conversation altogether, isn't it? Yeah, sleep deprivation is real. Okay, talking about that, it reminds me of a time in my life where I was a single mother. I've given birth to my child when I was, homeless back then. I already given birth to the baby. I have 3 growing children. I was in the process of getting a divorce from my then husband, trying to move ahead with my life, trying to get something better for my children. That was when I realized that, in order to attain the financial means that I need to sacrifice my sleep. And at that moment, that period, and I shared this in my TEDx talk, actually, the recording that I had in last year, was that I realized that moment was when I just had 2 hours of sleep every night. And I keep on going with that because, at that point, the only priority that was set onto me was to find money. And I didn't prioritize my health even at the moment because the lack of sleep could, it would manifest into something worse rather later. So I think the current phenomena at where we are right now, I mean the global pandemic and working from home, it gives us the luxury or the privilege to really relook into how we are working, which I am happy that all the other families are seeing that, the need of having more sleep, less hours of work, instead of being like busy bees or busy ants who keep on churning or being part of the rat wheel for other corporations. For what? For whose benefit will that be? Yeah, so I think let's say for example school, education, children waking up at 5, why is that a need be? Why can't they come or enter into school at 9 or 10? Why is there a specific timing, right? We got 24 hours for the whole day. We have been doing this for 50, 60 years already. Are we going to continue that?
Yeah, and if you really look at it using common sense, how does it aid learning to be sleep deprived? If you want your kids to learn effectively, they should have enough sleep.
Yeah.
But I think you brought up something important about how we've all been raised or conditioned to feel that we always have to overstretch. We always have to push ourselves hard. And I don't know, even though you were given the Woman of Resilience Award, I wonder if, we shouldn't be promoting the values of resilience all that much. And in a way, I feel this is all a result of capitalism. I think capitalism as a system is very exploitative, and it exploits bodies, and it encourages all of us to exploit our own bodies. I mean, the meaning of capitalism, like the Latin word capital, actually means head. And so I think it is inherent in the system of capitalism that it just makes, we come up with projects and things that our head wants to do, and we exploit our bodies in order to get there. And I think we really need to rethink that whole perspective.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think like something that came to my mind was this whole idea of like, so we have the body politic, but we can also have a mind politic. Yeah, because the mind is as important in considering the needs of the body as well. So mental, emotional health of all the citizens. There needs to be a politic around the mind of the citizen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that, that was something that came to my mind.
Yes, you mentioned earlier on about the psychosocial needs of any party involved, like even the police officer or the social worker, as well as the beneficiaries or the clients that is seeking for aid, right, for the help. And different people are in different lenses. They have their own perspective of things, and it is important for us to understand each other's lenses as well in order to work together. So for example, like social worker, they have this tendency of not wanting to raise certain issues or problems that they find as they are speaking to the clients that they see, because they do not want to be the person to come up with the solution, probably. Yeah, it could be it. That is just my assumption. Or the police officer who would just, can I just share something very interesting that happened to me quite recently, which is I was being stalked and accosted from my workplace one very night late in October last year. And when I decided to make a police report, because the person who does that appears to me as someone who have done it more than once. And I want to alert the authorities on it. So I went to the police station, I spoke to the police officer, I wrote, I wanted to submit in my report. And at the point of him taking down my report, at the end of it all, of course, you know, whatever that happens in between, that's another story altogether. But at the end of the report, he said to me, okay, so from now on, thank you so much for sharing this report. I will bring it to my investigating officer. We will be in touch with you. But from now on, try not to walk back home alone. Try to get someone to accompany you. Getting a grab bag from your workplace to your home will be quite expensive. Yeah, try not to go back home alone. So what he's telling me is that I shouldn't be feeling safe in my own country. Like, what's going on here? So what I'm trying to say is different officers in our life that we come across, right, have different lenses that they are working with, and they have their own checklist to untick as they are going through that. And not having a trauma-informed lens, that is another matter altogether, which shapes another person's experience, right, especially someone who's going through that traumatic event. And then for the client side of things, when they are being the first person who experience all of this, it shapes down the line whatever that they will assume that will happen in the future, and then develops distrust. So there is, like, you know, a connection from one to another here, and it's important for us to realize. I go into one of these leadership workshop recently, and this is something that is interesting, which I learned at that moment. The trainer was bringing up to us about NASA. You know, the astronaut
the
center,
space,
the space center,
American
yeah.
Space Agency.
And he brought up about one of these study that they have found, and a literature, like a book, I can't remember what's the book now, but that book talks about there was once in NASA, there's a culture that the scientists wouldn't bring up the defect of a space shuttle. And there was an incident where they didn't dare to bring it up because there is such a culture of not to bring it up. Then that space shuttle just blew up and they lost 6 of their astronauts' life. So how does that culture benefits then, right? To the main thing, which is to explore space and gather the evidence of whatever that they're trying to discover at that point. Which then leads me to this point. So that particular learning, if we can develop from NASA, right, in terms of speaking up, that is within the set of our culture right now, where the middle income families or the privileged ones are just there to just do their day-to-day and not challenge anything because they do not want to, make themselves in a position where they will have to do more work rather than what they are doing right now. So that's one. Secondly, the fear psychological safety is another, right? The fear of losing their jobs, not getting the promotions that they are being promised for because they raise up something. Yeah, and it's detrimental.
Yeah.
I think that's got several interesting connections for me. Like one is civil service culture, and the second one is for the policemen, right? Yeah. So I think let's start with the policemen. The two things that came up to my mind is, like, when you see someone who is traumatized, look at the person as a human being first. Don't go to your checklist. Okay. So ask question number 1. How are you feeling? I'm feeling sad. Okay. If feeling sad, ask. Oh, okay. Have compassion. Have compassion and empathize. Okay. Compassion and empathize. No, that isn't the way it should be. Like, yeah, there should be a different approach, an alternative that puts compassion and humanity at the heart of everything that we do. Yeah. And I think we know that deep down.
Yes.
We know that. And there is no checklist or one-size-fit-all manual to train police officers to do that. You just have to be a human being, which is the hardest thing of all.
I think we need a training manual, how to be a human being.
How to be human.
There again, you see, like, these things will then be fed through the chains of command, and someone up there will say, we need to have a manual for how to be a human being. Yeah, so that's one thing, right? I think the second thing that came to my mind about the defects, that one police officer, because this is a defect and a problem, that he's got a lot of resistance in sharing up the chain of command. If you had an alternative culture, that Liyana, you'll be put in charge of the police station and you shape a culture, now I want you to share problems and defects with me. Now all the police officers will say, hey, actually we received several instances of homelessness and we don't know how to deal with this. Like, this vulnerability and fallibility can be surfaced. And then only an enlightened leader at the top, this is systemic. Yeah, let us look into this. Right now, in the culture of today, it's like, don't share with me your problems.
Yeah,
Repress it. If you have a problem, okay, make sure for every problem you surface to me, have a solution for it.
Exactly. So we are very solution focused, right?
Very solution focused. Now, this brings us back to the civil service culture, which I wanted to talk about, right? Like, it's also the idea of rotation. So, like, a person at a high level in a senior management or a senior position, there's this thing called rotation. We rotate our civil servants, our middle managers and our senior civil servants quite fairly. Now, when they receive and if they nurture a culture where share with me the problems and the defects, then it's very different. Then they will approach it in a way where it's their responsibility to address it.
Yes.
Right now, what is the current state? The current state is, because I'm going to leave in the next 5 or 6 years, let us just accumulate these problems. It's not my problem. It's too big a problem. I don't want to deal with it. And then once it balloons, I would have left to another. And then the person who takes over me will inherit it. Yeah. So those are like a lot of systemic and structural issues that we need to address. And it's important that we elect someone like you to be in a position of power to effect that change.
Yes, yeah, that's one thing, right? Developing the psychological safety of any person at all in any organizational structure is important in order for us to extract the most valuable piece of perspective that anyone can have and bring it together. Then that will, at the end of it, offer the solution that we're looking for. But if we do not even create that space for someone to feel safe in speaking up and sharing about the problems that they face or the issues that they have seen or heard or the data they have already accumulated so far and they wanted to present, if that has not been presented and made possible, then nothing else will come thereafter, right? There's also another thing which is, I find that it's interesting you share about, and thank you for sharing that about the rotational basis. So it kind of prompts me in my head that, hey, if I were to put someone in that position of having that same line of thoughts as you, that, I'm just going to be here for 3 to 5 years, let's make do with it and do what I can, instead of looking at whatever or asking even what are the current pressing problems that there is. Let's take a shortcut. Let's try to create a problem that I can solve and then just do that. And then I can get whatever promotion that I need, and then let's leave whatever it is to the next guy, right? So can we stop it already? Yeah, it's not healthy going through that way.
There's actually a book that I read last year that I was very inspired by. It's called Community by Peter Block. And one of the things he writes about is that too often policymakers and and a lot of us, we think in terms of problems and having to solve them. And he feels once we start with that perspective, then whatever solution we come up with will just create more problems, and we get very stuck. It's hard to kind of transcend the situation. So he rather thinks, I think, what he suggests is that we talk about possibilities rather than problems. It's like, what possibility do I want to bring into this space, into this conversation? So I'm just thinking of our police officer, like if there was an invitation to not so much talk about problems, but what possibilities do you see to make things better? And the idea of a possibility is that you're not predicting the future. You don't know if it will happen, or because a solution is almost like, you can predict the future. Yes, this is going to work, and that's quite scary. I mean, we don't want to commit to knowing that this is going to work, so we stay safe. Whereas we talk about possibility, there's always a risk, but it's still like, what do you stand for? What do you care about?
I like that, because it induces a more open-mindedness from everyone else or any stakeholders that is involved in whatever that they're doing for that particular, project or experience or, and that, I think, leads me to another thing which I want to share. Is there a possibility to reshape the terms and the words and the discussion that we use among our community level, among the people among us, instead of just looking at things based on problem solution approach, like what you mentioned, right? And also on a more prioritization approach, where you want to prioritize that, okay, these are the current pressing problems that we have right now. This is a challenge that we need to look into, so let's fix it. Other than that, let's see, instead of looking at all of these problems, what if we come together and see, is there any possibility of coming together, putting our heads together and seeing if there are some set of challenges that we can tackle on, instead of prioritizing a problem and finding a solution to fix it. So now we are finding possibilities of the challenges that we would like to face head on and tackle from there. If that makes sense.
I'm thinking, is this similar to what I've thought, what I've come across, where, let's say in you have a group of activists and they want to do something. There's two ways to approach it. One is you have an objective, and then it's like, what are all the things we need to get done? And then you just assign people, right? And a lot of times you are forced to assign people to things maybe they don't want to do, or they don't have the capacity to do, and then that often leads to burnout. Whereas another approach is not to start with the objective, but just to look at the room. Okay, who are we? Who's in the room? What do we bring? What are my gifts? And then based on that, figure out, okay, what is possible for us to do together, right? It's a very different approach, and that approach, doesn't lead to burnout as much, because everyone is working within capacity.
Yes, within capacity is one, and within they can extract from their own lived experiences as well, right? And each of us has our own stories to tell, our own journey that we have gone through, and that in itself is valuable in different aspects.
And so in the case of the police officer, we convene a town hall of sorts. You have the community, you have the people who live in the estate, then you have, let's say, the police resources and their gifts, and you have the Minister for Home Affairs. And also, if this is a social problem, then you want to bring in other people from social service agencies and officers, and we come together and we discuss this. So this is definitely possible.
Yeah, I guess, instead of the police seeing that they have the sole responsibility for solving the problem, rather their role is to enable a neighborhood or community to solve the problems themselves. Maybe there could be like a neighborhood rotation of people helping to look out for each other to make sure that people can go home safe late at night.
Yes, and that is what, in the essence of empowering other individuals, right? Yeah, and empowerment can go a very long way, especially when someone who has been part of that process understands that, oh, I actually fit into the big puzzle and I am valued.
So going back to something you talked about earlier, wanting to rewrite laws, are there any specific things that you are currently focused on or interested in? Like, is there an example of a specific law that you would be?
Yeah. And this comes from when I was, I've not written any script before, but when I had to run in the election, it kind of like, pushed me beyond my comfort zone in a way, and then I had to write a script. So because of that, I was like meddling with what is happening right now and what am I not seeing right now in the space, right? So one thing that screams out to me was the finances and the needs that we have, because we usually revolve around that area, right? We are not addressing emotions right now. We are still not yet there. Mental health is just still in the initial seeding stage, so we still need a lot of more room to talk about that. But if we look at what we have right now in terms of finances and the needs that we need to address, what about the basic, the basic universal income that we can put into play? So, for example, I remember when I was doing my TEDx talk and I need to share how my financial assistance that I receive differs way beyond what a family of four needs at that point. Then I discovered that, at that point, there was not much research being done about what are the financial needs of, a family of four, for example. And I come across like vague studies and all of that says that, family of four in Singapore will require like 4,000 plus Singapore dollars in order to survive with the basic needs that they need to have. And looking back, right, in hindsight, I received $400. How does that, tally with the basic need? So that's one. And then I find that we are at a stage right now where it is beautiful, where we have researchers looking into this. And recently, late last year, we had, Dr. Ng and Professor Teo. Minimum income standards, yes. So when they conducted that study and then they published that research and the findings, I was like, yes, finally. Because we need to have this. We need to understand what are the basic needs that us, families in Singapore, require, whatever the nucleus, like family of four, family of six, family of two, or elderly person, what do we, like from the breakdown of things, what do we require just on the basic level to survive? We are not talking about thriving here, right? But just to survive, to get day to day. And having that, it helps to shape better policies.
Yeah.
We do not have a minimum income that we impose. And currently, a percentage of people are still earning way below from the studies that Dr. Ng and Professor Teo finds out.
There's a thinker that I've been following. His name is Rob Hopkins. He's based in the UK, and his big thing is the imagination and how important the imagination is. And he feels that we are at a time in our crisis when more than ever we need huge amounts of imagination to figure out how we can deal with social inequality, the climate crisis, environmental degradation, and sadly, this is also a time when we are the least imaginative. So apparently, people have been researching this, but since the 70s, IQ and creativity scores have risen up in tandem. But then from the 90s, IQ kept going up, but creativity started going down.
Oh no.
And part of the reason is because I think a lot of kids don't get as much free play. Their time is very structured. But it's also, I think we've all our mental space has become more and more encroached.
Yeah.
And so he actually feels that things like universal basic income are vital from the point of giving people mental space. Because if you take care of their basic needs, then they have more mental space. And when they have more mental space, they are able to be more imaginative.
Right.
And that's what we need right now. We need to tap into the imaginative resources of every single person. We can't afford to waste it. It's a tragic waste of human potential, the kind of society that we have now. So I actually really feel that, I don't know, if the government were more enlightened, that they would see that some form of universal basic income would be a great investment. Like probably like the best kind of investment you could make right now.
Yeah. And they want to have the ROI, right? So, well, let's try to attempt something and analyze what are the returns after a few years down the road, rather than being stuck in a stage where we don't know if this would work. Why not implement it first, right? And see how it goes. And we do not need to implement it for the whole nation. We do not need to start at the whole nationwide. If having a speck of data can help with the informed policy making, for example. But don't we have the resources to even deploy that nationwide?
Yeah.
What's stopping us?
No, I mean, for me, I think I love the imagination and the creativity that you talked about. And like when you say that Liyana was Woman of Resilience of the Year, it struck me as how much we celebrate resilience, and the alternative is Woman of Ease. You know, so yeah, because when you are the woman of ease, then you have creativity to think of far more innovative solutions than when you are a woman of resilience. Yeah, so I think like even the way we celebrate achievements, you're a woman of resilience, like it could be woman of ease, and with ease we have space, mental space to think more creatively.
The creativity, yes.
Yeah, so I think it gels well with like, for me, something else that is a struggle for me is the counter argument. I know it's difficult for us. I need to play the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Because we tend to agree so much with one another that we need to see what the other side thinks and to bring that into the conversation, right? And I think it is a conversation that we need to have on abuse, potential abuse. How do we ensure accountability of precious public funds that people have so hard earned, you know, so I work so hard and I pay my taxes, and part of these taxes get redistributed to people who need it the most through the means of a universal basic income. Yeah. Now the question that the civil servant would have against this idea of a universal basic income is abuse. How do you prevent abuse? How do you ensure that those who are taking it are not abusing this privilege or this policy that we have?
Right.
Yeah. So I think we need to discuss this a bit more.
Yeah, and thank you for playing the devil's advocate there. Because I think that a stage of playing the devil's advocate is us, I mean the way I look at it, it's just me perhaps, the way I look at it is us stopping ourselves and criticizing before even being creative in imagining. So it somehow sets the barrier of before discussion, you critique and stop and put a null and period over there. So you're bringing out about the potential of the abuse, right? Show me the study of what has been the years before of the abuse of people who gain financial aid. Show me that study. Then you can talk me. I mean, you can speak with me about the abuse that you foresee can happen, right? That's one. Secondly, trust. Trust is a factor that needs to be earned. And there are various factors that can earn someone's trust, right? Regardless whether it's the society at large or the beneficiaries or the person who deploys the resources to them. So, as human, how broken are we to not trust another human being who really takes up a lot of courage to come to you to ask for help? And yet, you are there in the mind frame or in setting that, or in the thinking that, how are you going to abuse this? Like there's a mismatch there, right? So instead of thinking everything, I'm nothing against having a different perspective or, a negative aspect of things or being a pessimist even, right? I'm nothing against that. However, if you rule that from the get-go of policy making, for example, and even introducing a certain scheme to help the needy, for example, if you introduce the abuse from the get-go and you have no sufficient data to even back it up in the first place, and you foresee that this can happen, why are we wasting our time on that? Right? Shouldn't we just deploy and then gather the data there? And then you can talk to me about abuse. And if there's none, so what are you foreseeing?
Actually, I wanted to ask you to relate something to your own personal experience as well, because I feel reading your life story that you have encountered a lot of people that disappointed you, and I'm thinking of your ex-husband, your husband at that time, who, I was reading and I felt that you were working very hard to do things, and then, he was maybe exploitative of that perhaps, but I'm curious, like in your own personal experience, have you imbalance in your relationships? Do you see like people abusing or exploiting, let's say, other people's generosity, and how do you negotiate that? How do you sort of approach that with your own perspective?
Yeah, that's a very good point that you bring up there, actually, and I like that because there is me in a phase of my life where I don't understand that's abuse when it happens, because along the way I've been taught to just respect and serve, for example, right, at that point. So that's one. Me now, in hindsight, that's abuse, and that's being exploited on. Why didn't I get that out of that stage at that moment? Do I have any other choice, or what is the resources that I have around me? So going back to what you have brought up, Unsu, is that it could have been abuse. It could have been a way for me to understand that whatever that is taught to me is not the end game, right? For example, loyalty. Do I need to stay loyal to my then husband even after going through a whole set of challenges with him, and him not being appreciative of the challenges or even not speaking up with regards to what I've done for? And he chose his own choices as well. So will that constitute with me staying in the abuse because I like it, or is it because I'm then not understanding that is an abuse? That's that, right? And at the same time, there is a whole different set of conversation, which is, if I were to rise up at that moment when the abuse is being done on me, will I then go through the battered woman syndrome, which is to defend myself and to get out of the situation, asking for the divorce because of all the years of not being appreciated, not being valued, and time again the infidelity happens. And I decided to say enough is enough. I go out. There could be a possibility that fights are involved and we get injured. Then I will be labeled as having the battered woman syndrome because I've been putting up with it for over so long of years, right? So in terms of psychology, there's so much in play. And in terms of foresight, there's so many different situations that you can, this reminds me of Doctor Strange, where, you can jump through hoops and try to see what can happen at the end of the day, or, like rewind back the time and all of that. But at the end of the day, who are we to be really certain of what the outcome may be when at the first stage we didn't do any action?
Yeah. I think what really stood out for me was this episode when I think your ex-husband had gone into prison, and then when he came out, you had a line that said, "I didn't even give him the time to dwell on his mistakes." You know, you had started a business by then, and you just put him to work, right? And I don't know. I just got a sense that you really give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
You don't try and get hung up on past mistakes,
Exactly.
and you really want to just allow as many people as possible to just move forward with their lives.
Because I believe in every single one of us, regardless of our past, we have our potentials and our possibilities, right? And as what I have been saying just now, or preaching even to the stage, is who are we to determine our potential and our possibilities when in the first place we are not given a chance to, right? And yeah, I think because you bring that up, Unsu, I have to say that it's based on my own belief system, and it's also based on the nature that everybody deserves a chance. Not to prove, but to create something out of nothing.
So I don't know, this may be making it too dualistic, but I feel like there are two, these basic fundamental worldviews. One is that people are inherently bad, and that you need laws and systems and all that to make sure they become good, or that people are actually inherently good, and then there's all these things that happen to us in our lives that make us unfortunately make tragic choices. So I don't know. Do you think that's too dualistic to say that these two different worldviews and?
Yeah, in a way, it seems too simple to just categorize people into such. But I think for me, and I can just speak for myself right here, is that what good does we impose a lot of rules and regulations and expecting for the bad to happen, and what good does that achieve? For me, I would rather provide or enable a space where good can thrive. And from there, if something bad happens, tackle it. Because I'm not God. I can't foresee so many things, right? So, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, I think it's a shift from looking at a problem to be solved or looking for mistakes to be addressed to cultivating the conditions for the flourishing of the human potential.
Yeah, and
so you're working on the
nurturing.
soil,
Yes.
to help to encourage the blossoming.
Yeah.
Which is far more difficult and more intuitive than the whole process of I identify a problem and then I need to gatekeep funds. I need to gatekeep people from abuse or from potential security implications.
And the beautiful thing, not beautiful, the interesting thing is that in that space in itself, right, that is us being humans too. Because humans, we are control freaks by nature. We want to control everything that we can, and that is why, access to funds, being accountable for the funds that has been given. Let's do unconditional, gifting, which is the basic income, basic universal income, for example, right? Make it unconditional. Create a space, like what you mentioned, the soil, to let it flourish and grow, and see what are the benefits from there. If you can let your mind in tune to what you can't control, and you can open your mind to what can be possible from there on, then there is something positive to look up to instead of just putting ourselves in the back seat and anticipating all the bad that can happen first.
Yeah, I'm a control freak by by conditioning, so I totally get it. Like I'm always thinking of what wrong can happen instead of what good can happen. So it's so wired in my own conditioning. Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing that. One spell to be broken. I feel like so many spells are being broken. The spell or the myth of self-reliance, so it's great. Yeah.
So we should probably start wrapping things up. Do you have any, a final question for Liyana?
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah, we've really covered quite a lot of ground. I've really appreciated this. Is there maybe like a last note would be, what is your biggest hope for the future, and what role do you see yourself playing in that?
Oh, So if I got a magic wand, I think if I can be the fairy godmother for one day, I would push that all book smart people and street smart people are equally valuable and be valued and be seen on the same stage together. Yeah, because right now it's imbalanced.
Yeah, no, I really agree with that. I think like I don't know, like blue collar work and white collar work, they're just seen in such like
different tiers and different
valued so differently
Yeah.
when it shouldn't be that way,
and we all bleed red blood. Hey, what's that?
as I can prove. Oh, that was almost
You can attest to
a
that.
bad. Anyway, I've really found it very inspiring talking to you. I love your presence and your positivity despite everything you've been through, and you give us so much hope. So
Thank you, and the pleasure is mine. And also, I'm very grateful and thankful to both of you for sharing with me like different perspective and also books that I can read up on, and even the spells that I look forward to breaking more. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
okay, thank you so much,
Thank
Liyana.
you.